Welcome, everyone. This is a lecture for the Masters in the School of Humanities and the Faculty of Arts. I'm Mark Alfano, and I am both the instructor for this week and the author of the paper that you were asked to read. Namely gossip as a burdened virtue. Now, that might come across as a bit bewildering. People have negative associations with gossip, positive associations with virtue. You might not have come across this notion of a burdened virtue. Don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it, and I'm going to try to convince you that gossip, or at least the disposition to gossip in a certain way, is in fact what in philosophy we call a burdened virtue. I should say that I'm not actually the author of this paper, I'm the co-author of this paper. My co-author is Brian Robinson, who's a friend and colleague in the United States. He's currently employed at Texas A&M Kingsville, and you can see a picture of him here. I've also included a screenshot of the paper, which was published in Ethical Theory and Moral Practice in 2017. And of course, a PDF of that is available through the course website. Now, when we think about gossip, we think about people saying stuff about us behind our backs. And sometimes we don't like that, because sometimes they say things about us that are unpleasant, or that we think are unrepresentative, or even false or lies. And yet, at the same time, we like it when people talk about us, because we're hypersocial creatures as humans. And this, I think, is kind of brought out nicely by a quote from one of Oscar Wilde's plays, where one of the characters says that there's only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. So let's get started by reviewing a bit of the epistemology that you have studied so far in this class. There are different ways to define epistemology, but one decent characterization is that it's the study of both the nature and the value of knowledge, accurate belief, understanding, and wisdom. So, for instance, there are discussions of what distinguishes knowledge from mere true belief. Like, if I believe that it's raining, and it is raining, but I decided that based on flipping a coin, and if it came up heads, then I would conclude that it's raining, and if it came up tails, I would believe that it's not raining. That seems like it doesn't really count as knowledge. But if I actually have the correct belief, then I'm going to take my umbrella with me in the same way that I would if I knew that it was raining. So there's a bit of a paradox there, where it seems like, well, knowledge doesn't seem to add much beyond true belief. This kind of problem was discussed as far back as the Meno dialogue by Plato. And he offers a kind of solution to this, which many philosophers accept, not all. The solution is something like, when you have knowledge, then your accurate belief is immune to certain kinds of challenges that you might bring yourself, or that might come socially. So if I really know, then when someone says, yeah, but are you sure that it's raining? Then I can say, yeah, I just looked out the window, or I just looked at my weather app, or something like that, and I keep my knowledge. Whereas if I did the kind of coin flip technique, and someone says, yeah, but really, do you think that a coin flip is reliable? Then I might lose my accurate belief. So there is something to do with counterfactuals involved with the distinction between knowledge and merely accurate belief. There are further kinds of valuable epistemic states that people sometimes talk about in this field. So understanding versus knowledge is interesting. I taught a class recently in person, which I would prefer to be doing instead of this, where I said, okay, who here knows that during the day the sky is blue? Everyone raised their hand. And then I said, okay, who can explain why the sky is blue? And someone raised their hand and they said, it's because the light is being reflected off the ocean into the sky, and the ocean's blue, and that makes the sky blue. And unfortunately, this is not correct. You can Google it and find out what the actual explanation is if you like. But it has to do with the refraction of light through the atmosphere. A further thing that people find valuable beyond understanding, which it has to do with knowledge, not merely of what is the case, but why it's the case, is wisdom. And wisdom seems to be more a trait of a person rather than a state or an attitude. So you wouldn't say that someone is wise just for 10 minutes, but they could know something for 10 minutes, or they could understand something for an hour. So wisdom seems to be this kind of longitudinal thing that has to do with knowing not only what is the case, but why it's the case, and perhaps also what makes it important or what is genuinely important. I'm not going to delve into that in detail in this lecture, but these are some of the core attitudes and states and traits that are studied in epistemology these days. Now, there have been a couple of interesting developments in epistemology that, of course, call back to historical work as well. So one of these is the study of what's now called virtue and vice epistemology. When you hear the term virtue and vice, you might get sort of like religious vibes from that, and that's fair. Certainly the world religions have a lot to say about virtue and vice, but there are secular accounts of virtue and vice as well. So in contemporary epistemology, we think of these as character traits, so sort of ways that a person is over a long time to a somewhat reliable extent. And they are evaluable as either good or bad. So if you've got a good disposition when it comes to knowledge, or a good disposition when it comes to understanding, or a good disposition when it comes to wisdom, that would count as an epistemic virtue. By contrast, if you have a bad disposition when it comes to knowledge, or a bad disposition when it comes to understanding, or a bad disposition when it comes to wisdom, that would count as an epistemic vice in the ways that we sort of theorize these things now. Interestingly, Lisa Tessman has talked about virtues that she calls burdened. So a burdened virtue is one that is only kind of relevant in the context of oppression. It's a virtue for, and probably only for, people who face systematic discrimination and are in a position to help others who face similar oppression. So the basic idea here would be like, suppose you are constantly being harassed. Not constantly, but most days you face a little bit of harassment. And it's based on your identity, either your gender, your race, or your religion, or your caste, or your ethnicity, or your nationality, whatever it might be. That could lead someone to reasonably be sort of angry all the time. And it is quite painful to be angry all the time. It's stressful. It leads to inflammation. It leads to insomnia. It leads people to mistrust strangers because they just assume everyone's going to keep doing this kind of thing. On the other hand, someone who embodies that kind of disposition might be best prepared to protect themselves against people who are, in fact, going to discriminate against them. And they might also be well prepared to warn others about the possibility or the likelihood of such discrimination. So on the one hand, it's painful and burdensome to have it, but it turns out to be for the good, either of the person who has that trait or for others or both. So this is a key concept that is going to come up again later in the lecture. At the same time, there's been a further exploration of what we call social epistemology. So if you think about Descartes, for instance, in the Meditations, he's kind of the core example for this. He decides that he's going to rebuild all of science from his armchair while sitting in a tent with a little fire that somebody else made for him to keep him warm and give him some light. And he's just going to reason from first principles and start with the fact that he's absolutely certain that he knows that he exists. And from there he goes to, well, that means that, and he gives multiple arguments for this, that God must also exist, and also that God must not be a deceiver, which means that I can trust my senses and my inferential capacities, which means that the things that I conclude, at least if I have a clear and distinct idea about them, are reliable. And so then I can proceed with science. It's quite remarkable what he tried to do in the Meditations, or at least pretended to do in the Meditations. In fact, in real life, Descartes was a social butterfly. He was constantly writing letters to other scholars and scientists and philosophers all throughout Europe and also in Asia, and seeking feedback from them and learning from them. So it's not like he actually did what he pretended to do in the Meditations, but that was the sort of rhetorical pose that he took in that work. By contrast, social epistemology suggests that much, or in fact, most of what we know because somebody else told us. So how do you know when you were born? Well, you were there, but of course you don't remember it. You certainly didn't have the concept of a calendar at the time. So you know your own birthday, which is a pretty intimate fact about you. It's something you use, in banking and documents and stuff. And when you apply for a passport, you know that because somebody else told you and you believe them. And in fact, much of what we know, probably most of what we know, probably the vast majority of what we know because somebody else told us or showed us. So social epistemology studies the transmission of these core states of epistemology: knowledge, accurate belief, understanding, even wisdom. And the idea is that these are transmitted through things like testimony, not just testimony in courts, but just taking someone's word for it, trust, and also mistrust. The idea there being that we don't want to just have people be gullible all the time and just take everyone's word for it on any topic, but rather what we want is to sort of figure out a way to trust the right people on the right topics and mistrust the wrong people on other topics. So that's kind of the background for this paper. The core epistemology, throw in virtue and vice epistemology, and then also throw in social epistemology. And these are all going to be relevant when it comes to gossip. What do I mean by gossip? I don't mean what you'll find if you look it up in the dictionary. What Brian and I mean by gossip is the transmission of reputation-relevant information about a third party who is not present. So the idea is that I say something to you about her or him, and he or her he or she is not present for this transmission. Gossip, as we will be discussing it, is typically negative. It can be positive. So, gossip can be negative in many ways. Did you hear this person did that thing? Did you hear that person had something done to them? It can also be positive. So it's possible to say like, oh, there's this big anonymous donation to a charity. But I know who it is. It was this person. Aren't they amazing? Aren't they generous? So it can be positive as well. But the point is that you're whispering in someone's ear about someone else who's not there. It doesn't count as gossip if the third party is there. So if I tell Marzipan, the rabbit, Veronica, who's my partner, she doesn't want to give you raisins anymore, even though you love them, because she thinks you're getting fat. That would count as gossip, because it is about a third party, Veronica, who's not present. And in this case, it's kind of negative. But I could say, Veronica thinks you're getting kind of skinny. She wants to give you more raisins. Isn't that great? Isn't Veronica wonderful? And that would also, on the definition that I'm using in this paper, count as gossip. So the point is that it's me talking to someone about someone who's not here, and what I'm saying matters for that third party's reputation. If it doesn't matter for the reputation, if it's just like, hey, did you hear Veronica, she decided to take a day off. Doesn't really matter. Or, she changed the shampoo that she's using. Or, she decided that she wants to go to the beach rather than the mountains. That would not really be reputation relevant in most cases. And so that would not count as gossip. Okay, so the core claim of this paper is that the disposition to gossip well, not just to engage in the behavior, but to do it well, which I'll spell out in more detail, is a social epistemic burdened virtue. That's a mouthful. So it's social because it's not just about me sitting in my armchair and figuring things out. It's me talking to someone about someone. It's epistemic because I'm transferring information. It's burdened because it's the sort of thing that you wouldn't need to do if you were operating in a context where oppression was not systematic. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And it's a virtue because it's admirable. By the same lights, the disposition to gossip poorly, and there are lots of ways to gossip poorly, is a social epistemic vice. So I'm going to explore all of this in more detail in what comes. Let's start with an example. Several decades ago, the New York Times published this article. Women at Brown University, which is in Rhode Island in the United States, had started to write the names of students, male students at that university on the walls of the bathroom stalls at Brown, listing them as rapists. This is a form of gossip, according to my definition, because it's relevant to those men's reputations. It's being said to other people, and those men, unless they invade the women's bathroom, are not able to see that. So they're third parties about whom the people are talking, but they can't hear what's being said about them, or maybe they hear it second or third or fourth hand later on. This was a really big deal. It made the paper of record, the New York Times, and similar stories have come out of Ohio State University, out of Columbia University, more recently. This kind of thing happens, unfortunately, rather often. Now you might think, okay, well, what's going on here? So we've got a certain kind of gossip, at least according to my definition of gossip, that's going on. And there might be reasons why the people who are writing this, the women who are writing these accusations on the walls, are not willing to make their accusations public. They might face blowback if they did. They could face reputational damage. If they're alleging this because they themselves were victims, they could face victim blaming. They could be slut shamed, all kinds of things. So you can see why people might want anonymity in a case like this. On the other hand, one of the men who was labeled in this way was interviewed by the New York Times. And one of the things he said, it's quoted as saying, was, "I've been labeled guilty with no chance to defend myself." Right, so his name appeared on this list. He doesn't know who wrote it. He might have a good guess, but he might not have a good guess. And he's not in a position to challenge whoever wrote it, or to ask, what was it that I did that makes you think this? He's not in a position to try to exonerate himself, and so on. So you can see why, on the one hand, people who face discrimination and violence might engage in gossip, but you can see also why people who are gossiped about might object to it, especially if they think, rightly or wrongly, that the gossip is inaccurate or misrepresenting things. So how are we going to understand this? We're going to understand the phenomenon of gossip and the disposition to gossip through the morality as cooperation hypothesis, which was advanced several years ago by a collaborator of mine, Oliver Curry. So according to Oliver, morality is a set of norms, values, dispositions, institutions, emotions, and other things that lead to evolutionarily stable solutions to non-zero-sum games that humans repeatedly face. Okay, I realize that's a mouthful. So norms are expectations about what people will do and what they should do. So a really simple norm in Australia is everybody drives on the left side of the road rather than the right side of the road. And we all expect everyone else to do that. And if they don't do that, if they drive on the right side instead, we blame them. So there's a descriptive aspect to the norm. This is what I think you're going to do. And then there's also an evaluative aspect to the norm. If you don't do what I think you're going to do, I'm going to be really upset with you. That's one aspect of morality as cooperation. There are other things like values. So for instance, we value things like generosity and reciprocity. We value things like respect for prior ownership. Like if you come and take my laptop that I bought and paid for and you just steal it, I'm going to be pretty annoyed. Morality also has to do with disposition. So I already mentioned virtues and vices. So we admire people, for instance, for their courage. We admire them for their generosity. We admire them for their sense of fairness. We admire them for being good friends and for caring about their families and so on. Morality also has to do with institutions. So this has to do with law, but also with more informal institutions, rules, expectations in friend groups, and so on. And morality has to do with emotions. So, if I hurt you, you might express resentment towards me, and then I might feel guilty for what I did, and I might apologize, and then you might feel a sense of forgiveness, and that's all part of morality. So there's lots of ways in which morality is implemented according to this theory. But all of them have to do with what are called evolutionarily stable solutions to non-zero sum games. Okay, games. We're not talking about board games here, though we could talk about board games and card games. But what's under discussion here is the concept of a game in so-called game theory, which was developed by von Neumann about 100 years ago. And the idea here is that in game theory, how things turn out for me are not down entirely just to my decisions. So I can't just look at my options, pick one, and that's that. I can't just say like, okay, I'm at the gelato shop. I could have vanilla. I could have chocolate. I could have marzipan. And I just pick one and that's what I get. It's rather that what happens for me is a function not only of my choice, but also the choice of at least one other person, perhaps many other people. So that's what makes it a game. What makes it a non-zero sum game is that in some cases, I can benefit without anyone else losing. So suppose I and Veronica want to go to dinner together, and we have two options. There's a Mexican restaurant and there's a Thai restaurant. And the main thing for us is we want to go to the same place. I mean, we want to eat, but the main thing is that we want to eat together. So what's important is that we end up at the same place, regardless of how much each of us prefers either of the two. Suppose I slightly prefer Mexican and she slightly prefers Thai. We can solve this either by both going to the Mexican place or both going to the Thai place. If she goes to the Thai place because she prefers Thai and I go to the Mexican place because I prefer Mexican, then we're both dining alone and that's kind of pathetic. So we're both going to be unhappy. So there's a way in which both of us can get what we want without the other suffering. That's what makes a game non-zero sum. Now, if we think about games that get repeated, so Veronica and I go out to eat relatively frequently, we don't just go out once, then there's a question, how stable are the solutions to these games? So we could have a system, for instance, where if the last time we went out, it was to Thai, then the next time is Mexican. And then the time after that is Thai. And the time after that is Mexican. So then we're engaging in a kind of longitudinal reciprocity where sometimes I go to a place that is not my favorite, but is good enough. And I get to go there with someone I want to spend time with. And then other times we go to the place that I prefer and she doesn't prefer as much, but she prefers to be there with me rather than to dine alone. That makes for what's called an evolutionarily stable strategy or evolutionarily stable solution. It's a way of interacting with other people so that you don't just cooperate once and that's it, but you cooperate multiple times over the course of many interactions. What I want to argue is that gossip has an important role to play when it comes to thinking of morality as cooperation. And that's because there are at least two, but certainly two main ways of stabilizing cooperation. One of them is what we might call partner control. So when Marzipan is naughty, sometimes what I do is I spray her with a little bit of water, which she doesn't like. So I punish her for doing a thing that she's not supposed to do, like chewing on power cords and endangering her life. And then she learns through that punishment not to do that again. Likewise, I can control her behavior by rewarding her. So when she does something especially cute or sweet, I can give her a raisin or some other kind of sweet treat that she likes, and that will make her more inclined to do it again. We do this kind of thing with each other as well. We're not that different from other mammals as humans. So when someone that you're in a relationship with does things that you don't like, you can frown at them, you can yell at them, you can, flick their ear. You can do all kinds of things. And all of these are ways of signaling, hey, I like that, or I don't like that. Meaning, do that again, or do that some more, or hey, can you knock it off? Don't do that again. That's partner control, as Cushman and Martin talk about it. Control here is meant in a relatively gentle sense. They're not talking about being like a manipulative asshole. They're talking more about like showing someone through your signals, which could be communicative, physical, emotional, any kind of other thing, what you like, what you don't like, on the assumption that they will respond reasonably to those signals. The second way, sorry, Marzipan is also getting up my nose because she's shedding right now. The second way that Cushman and Martin talk about stabilizing cooperation has to do not with you're stuck in a relationship with someone and you're trying to show them how you do and don't want to be treated, which is partner control, but rather partner choice, where you can say, you know what, Marzipan, I've had enough of you. I'm going to put you up for adoption and find a different bunny. Don't worry, I won't do it. So with partner choice, the idea is there are lots of people in this world, and you can't be in a relationship with all of them. So when there are strangers, you have the choice to try to engage or not. And likewise, with people that you currently have a relationship with, you can throttle that, you can make it more intimate, or you can cut them off entirely, ostracize them. So those are quite significant behaviors from a moral point of view, social point of view, of the point of view of just well-being. It's bad to have no friends, but it's also bad to have friends who treat you poorly. So one of the main things that we do in cooperating stably is try to find people that we can reasonably expect to be able to interact with over the course of time. And that's a matter of partner choice. So the claim here is that gossip can function to support both partner choice and partner control. So let me see if I can convince you of this. Let's think about the structure of gossip. There's got to be three people involved. So there's the gossiper, there's the person or people that they're talking to, and there's the person or people that they're talking about. And merely talking about someone is not enough to count as gossip. So if I just tell you, like this person is 6 feet tall, this person has red hair, this person, caught COVID. In many cases, this is not going to count as gossip. It's just mentioning things about someone to someone. What makes it gossip is that it's about some normative criterion, usually moral, but could be something else, relevant to the subject's reputation and the hearer's potential relationship to that subject. So if I say, this person did this thing or is this way or has that attitude, and that matters because either you don't know them yet, and this might make you want to not know them, or want to know them soon. Now we're talking about gossip. Or if I say this person, has this character trait, they tend to do this sort of thing. They didn't just do it once. It's part of a pattern. And that's kind of the way they are. That will inform the hearer about whether to choose to try to cooperate with or have some kind of relationship with the subject of the gossip. Now, importantly, gossip can be true, it can also be false. So if I say to Marzipan, Veronica thinks that you're getting fat and she doesn't want to give you raisins anymore, that would be false because Marzipan is very svelte. She's very athletic, actually. She can jump 3 times her own body height, which I can't do. But if I said something false, then that would still constitute gossip because it's reputation relevant. And that means that we have to separate out the ethics and epistemology of gossip from whether gossip is sort of defined as or assumed to be true or false. There's a further aspect of this, which is related to the distinction between merely true belief and knowledge that I mentioned before. So I could flip a coin, use that to decide whether it's raining, and maybe I get it right sometimes. So I end up with a true belief, but it's not based on reliable evidence. Likewise, when we gossip about people, we might get it right. We might say, like, this person, they're a mess. They're going to try to exploit you, and be right that in fact this person is going to try to exploit you. But if it's based solely on a guess or on a stereotype, then it's not based on reliable evidence, and that makes it faulty even though it's accurate. So what we want with gossip is for it both to be true and for it to be based on some kind of reliable evidence. And one aspect of that surely is going to be whether it's firsthand or secondhand or thirdhand. So it's one thing if I say, like, Veronica told me that she's not going to give you raisins, right? That's firsthand. It would be another thing if it was like, well, Jose told me that Veronica told him that she's not going to give you raisins. And it would be yet another thing if I said, a lot of people are saying that Veronica is saying that she's not going to give you raisins, right? And the more distal the evidence is, the less reliable it is, the less we want to take it seriously. Another thing to say about gossip is that there's a sort of gendered component to it. There's a painting here titled Gossip, and you'll note that the 3 figures in that painting are all women. So it's a phenomenon that's kind of coded as feminine, but of course it needn't be feminine. The example that I started with at Brown University also had to do with women. And this is going to turn out to be relevant to the idea of gossip as a burden virtue because there's a lot of misogyny and patriarchal attitudes in both contemporary society and historically. So it wouldn't be surprising if women ended up gossiping more because they're in that position that makes burden virtues possible and even desirable. Another feature that we mentioned in the paper is that gossip can focus on the subject as either an agent or a patient. So the idea there is you can gossip about someone by saying, this person did this thing or is inclined to do that thing. That's talking about them as an agent. Another way to gossip about someone is you say, like, oh, this happened to this person. They were hurt in this way, or someone said something to them and humiliated them, whatever it might be. And that's gossiping about someone as a patient. In the paper, we argue that the kind of gossip that is defensible typically is about someone as an agent rather than as a patient. Because if someone is dangerous as an agent, it's important to inform people so that they can be sort of forearmed when dealing with them. Whereas if someone is merely someone who has suffered, gossip about them might still be important because it helps people plan in advance to sort of be sensitive about their vulnerabilities, but it's less important than gossip that helps to protect me from it. So yeah, so the basic idea is that gossip about the subject's agentic traits is the most morally important form of gossip. So returning to this sort of triad, the function of gossip is, so the speaker talks to the hearer about the subject with respect to a normative criterion, and they do so in order either to punish the subject by reducing their opportunities for cooperative and exploitative encounters, meaning that the subject doesn't have a chance to take advantage of the hearer because the hearer knows not to deal with them, or possibly also just to protect the hearer and maybe even others from the subject in the future. So this relates back to the morality as cooperation hypothesis and the fiery Cushman stuff about either controlling someone because they know that they're being gossiped about and they better change their ways, or helping people choose cooperative partners by protecting them from those who are likely to take advantage of them. Okay, now, not all gossip is good. That has to be acknowledged. And there's sort of two ways that we can approach this. We can think about what is it that makes someone trust, just descriptively trust gossip, and then also what makes gossip genuinely trustworthy. And these are distinct, right? So you can trust things that are trustworthy, you can trust things that are untrustworthy, you can mistrust things that are trustworthy, you can mistrust things that are worthy of your mistrust. So what we want is a kind of match there, where people are disposed to trust what is actually trustworthy and not other stuff, and also disposed to mistrust things that are worthy of their mistrust and not things that are worthy of their trust. There's empirical literature that suggests that gossip is trusted when it comes from a source who's already trusted. So if a stranger comes up to Marzipan and says, Veronica's not going to give you raisins, she's not going to care so much. But if I tell her that, after I've taken care of her for years and she loves me, well, then she's going to start thinking seriously about what I said. There's also empirical evidence that gossip is trusted more when it's firsthand rather than second or third hand, right? So, I was there when the thing was said versus I heard someone say that someone was there when the thing was said. Gossip is also more likely to be trusted when it's about a relative stranger than someone that you already know well. So Marzipan knows Veronica and loves Veronica. So if I tell her, Veronica is not going to give you raisins, she's going to look at me and be like, "Are you trying to joke with me? This is some kind of practical joke." She's not going to believe it. But if I tell her some random person that she's never met thinks she's a little pudgy and that person is not going to give her raisins, she'd be thinking, well, I have no idea about this person other than what you just told me, so I'm inclined to believe you. Gossip, in addition, is, from the normative point of view, trustworthy when, or at least to the extent that the speaker's reputation is on the line. So I'm going to be dealing with Marzipan for many years, I hope. And if she comes to think of me as a liar, that's really bad for me. So the fact that I'm telling her in person and that I and doing so not wearing a mask means that I'm sort of putting my reputation on the line. This is the sort of thing that I'm really committed to. And if it turns out I'm wrong, you can come back and make recriminations against me. By contrast, say in a case of like an anonymous accusation, the speaker's reputation is not on the line because no one knows who they are. And so if they turn out to be wrong, no one can come back to them and say, why did you say that? You owe us an apology, that kind of thing. Gossip is also generally more trustworthy when it comes from multiple people, especially if they're independent. So if you hear the same kind of gossip about someone from people who don't even know each other, that's really strong evidence. It's not guaranteed, but it would be a strange coincidence if that kind of thing were to happen. Gossip is also more trustworthy when it is consistent with the reputation of the subject that they've already established. So if you have already shown yourself to be, say, stingy with raisins towards other rabbits, and then you're stingy with raisins towards this rabbit, or the accusation is that you're going to be stingy with raisins towards this rabbit, that's more trustworthy. And more generally, gossip is more trustworthy when it occurs in a community that usually gossips accurately. So if you've got a community where trust has sort of broken down, then gossip is not going to be particularly trustworthy. But if there is a community that sort of has established norms of accepting people's gossip and punishing them when they turn out to be wrong, then that is going to, in general, increase the trustworthiness of the gossip in that community. Now, of course, as I said, there's no guarantees here. So things can go wrong. They can go wrong in multiple ways. And these might be described as the pathologies of gossip. So they can go wrong at the source with the speaker. The speaker might be talking about someone and say something about them that they didn't actually do, or accuse them of having a vice that they don't actually have. Maybe they did something wrong, but in general, they would never do that again. Or the speaker might say something about a subject who, did what they did, what is alleged, and at the time did have the bad character that is being imputed to them. But this person has realized the errors of their way, they've apologized, and they've reformed. And so actually now they are trustworthy. Maybe a year or two ago they weren't, but they've made serious efforts and their apologies been accepted, and they should be accepted into the community. So that's some ways in which gossip can go wrong with the source or the speaker. It can also go wrong in the process of transmission. So we know a lot of things about each other. We say some things about each other. Sometimes we say too much. Sometimes we say too little. So the speaker can mess that up in the process of transmission. And the speaker can also mess things up by repeating unreliable gossip from another speaker. So if I hear really reliable gossip from someone who's always gotten it right in the past, and I pass that on to someone else, now I'm a link in a chain. I wasn't there, but this person, I'm pretty sure, would not lie to me. And I'm pretty sure they are reliable in forming beliefs. So if they gossip to me, then I can protect other people potentially by gossiping to them and passing on what they have to say. But if they gossip to me unreliably, then when I pass that along, and even if I say, I heard this from this person, but, it's a bit dodgy, then I can end up hurting someone's reputation without any kind of justification, which is obviously a problem. And there can also be errors in reception. So people like Miranda Fricker and Jose Medina have written about this phenomenon of testimonial injustice, which crops up when someone someone's testimony is systematically disregarded or not given adequate credence because of some kind of identity-related prejudice on the part of the hearer, not on the part of the speaker. So I would believe it if you told me, but I won't believe it if she tells me, because I don't think that women are honest, for instance. That would be a case of testimonial injustice. So there are various kinds of ways that gossip can go wrong, and we explore these in the paper. So to sum things up, the core claim of the paper is that the disposition to gossip well is a social epistemic burdened virtue. And by the same lights, the disposition to gossip poorly is a social epistemic vice. And just to bring things back around to the example that we started with, there's one of these men at Brown who says, I've been labeled guilty with no chance to defend myself. I think when we reason about the ethics of gossip, it's important to ask, what is the right of reputational self-defense here? If people are talking about me behind my back and I don't know who they are, and they're saying things that I think are inaccurate or misrepresentative, or even if I think that what they're saying is accurate and represents things adequately about my past self, if I've apologized and reformed my ways and received forgiveness, then perhaps I deserve some kind of way to get back into the moral community. This is one of the things that makes gossip kind of a burden virtue, because it can also go wrong in this way longitudinally. Related to that, you might think that there's something like right to apologize, to repair relationships, and to reform oneself. And when gossip gets out of hand, this right, this kind of moral right, is not respected. So that makes things really tricky. I don't actually have a solution to this, but I think that it is worth thinking this through and considering what further ways we can theorize and explore the nature and function of gossip in moral communities and networks. And with that, Marzipan and I thank you for your attention.